Do you still watch the Oscars? In fact, does anyone?
Okay, full disclosure. This video is not about Ricky Gervais, and he's not hosting the Oscars. I wish. And it's not clickbait, because I am using Ricky Gervais as an idea about why I think the Oscars are no longer working in 2024.
Painful as it is for me, a long-time cinema lover, to say, I'm just not feeling it no more. And I'm going to tell you why.
I never thought I would say this about the Oscars, the main event of an industry that I am invested in as a creative and a movie buff. I think one of the final nails in the coffin was actually Ricky Gervais. Hey, how you doing? I'm Anthony Aris-Osula, and yeah, let's get into it. So the Oscars, right? So full disclosure, I used to be one of the biggest Oscar fans. Growing up in the 80s, especially on a council estate in London, what my American friends might call a kind of a project. It was a transportation, staying up late. My parents allowed me to watch this glitz and glamour of this award ceremony where some people I recognised on the movies from my little TV screen were dressed up, all suited and booted or dressed up to the nines. And I was like, wow, the glamour and the glitz just blew my little child's mind in the 80s. Whether I'd seen the movies or not, some I had. Well, actually, majority I had it when I was very small. But as I got older, especially in my teens, I made the effort to go to the cinema and see some of these movies. So there was some that I was rooting for and others I was learning about in the process of the award ceremony. Either way, it wasn't really about whether I'd seen the movies or not. It was about being in this world of Hollywood with the glitz and the glamour that I'd grown up with. My parents, particularly my mum, she loved old Hollywood. I grew up watching all of the MGM classics and Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, all the big productions that used to be shown on TV when I was growing up as a child. My dad preferred the more cerebral type of more cynical movies of the late 60s and the 70s. One particular film I remember my dad really loved, Dustin Hoffman, Little Big Man. I loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, those type of movies. My dad got me into staying up late, watching them. And that was my introduction to film, as well as going to the cinema in the 80s to see a lot of the big movies with him as his plus one. So I grew up with a big love for movies that I inherited from my parents, but also just discovered on my own. Huge Star Wars fan, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future. A lot of the old classics were my jam growing up. What really had me about the Oscars was it was just a celebration of cinema. Seeing, again, the actors in some of my favourite movies show up, presenting awards, being nominated, being honoured. And just the imagination that one day I could be involved in the movie business. One day, before I even had an interest in acting, somehow I was magnetised to the whole industry and brought to it a bit like a moth to a flame. Those were the good old days, staying up really late and then waking up and finding out who won what and who showed up and who gave the award and who... And then you watched people like Joan Rivers talk about who dressed the best and all that kind of stuff. It was a great experience being a fan of cinema, and the Oscars was the creme de la creme. It was the very top of the pyramid of the whole Hollywood machinery. So to give you a bit of my credentials, besides being a movie buff from childhood, I also got into entertainment reporting for radio and occasional magazines where I would interview people on junkets. I interviewed people like Cuba Gooding Jr. for Red Tails, David Oyelowo for Selma. I introduced people like Dennis Haysbert. But one of my favourite interviews actually was a young Jennifer Hudson when she just appeared in Dreamgirls. Literally, I think just a few weeks before she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. That's one of my proudest moments of actually interviewing, well, actually two when you count Cuba Gooding, but two Oscar-winning actors. That was a great highlight on my CV and just a great experience, particularly with Jennifer because she was amazing as Effie White in Dreamgirls, and I was rooting for her a while during the nomination process because I met her in real life and she was a really humble, down-to-earth person, as well as giving a masterclass performance, debut performance, mind, in Dreamgirls. So, besides doing some reviews for radio and magazines and going to a ton of junkets, interviewing different celebrities, and then obviously being on the red carpet and trying to jostle to get someone, it's fair to say that I know my way around movies and the whole shebang. I wouldn't say I'm no great critic, but I knew more than the average person, and I was heavily invested. It was my favourite pastime, getting into the movies. Until it wasn't. And that was a beginning of a slow death where I stopped going to junkets. I stopped getting in writing reviews. I just started to fall out of love with cinema slightly before the pandemic. So I can't blame the pandemic. That just probably put fuel to the fire. But leading up to that period, for sure, there was an element of somehow the movies weren't quite sticking. Mind you, I was still very invested in the MCU at that time. Marvel movies, bang, shebang. Because again, I grew up reading comics and loving comics and being like, wouldn't it be amazing to see, I don't know, the X-Men on big screen, and boom, there it appeared. Or Iron Man, Captain America 4, boom, it appeared before me. And I wouldn't say the novelty has worn off, but the quality is kind of worn down. But anyway, I digress. My favourite movies are from the 1970s, like I mentioned. Films like Chinatown, obviously The Godfather, Taxi Driver. And my absolute favourite, if I'm honest, it's not the best movie, mind, but childhood favourite is obviously the original Star Wars. My second best era probably, well, it's a toss-up between the late 60s and the 80s. I know that's like two extremes. 70s is my favourite period, but some of my all-time favourite movies are actually in the 80s. But I just think the standard of the 70s was so gritty and realistic and a little bit cynical that it kind of stands out as a real kind of experience. And that began in the late 60s when you think of films like The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde and Midnight Cowboy. Again, I remember taking time out to when Blockbusters was still a thing and just getting all these DVDs out and just binging on these classic movies. So to say I'm invested in movies and Hollywood is a bit of an understatement. And though there has been an element of questionable behaviour coming from the industry, elements of darkness, sinister rumours and mumblings coming out, I've been more in love with the art and the craft and not so much the behind-the-scenes gossip and rumours, even though some of it is getting so loud, it's impossible to block out your ears. And I say that to say when it comes to the Oscars, Academy Awards, Hollywood, I think, has taken such a wrong turn. It's gotten so out of touch with the general populace. The average moviegoers, like you, like me, I feel like we're completely disconnected to most of Hollywood these days, where before, in the old days, there was a little bit of a mystique, and Hollywood and movies served as an escapism from our everyday life. Now they're just bombarding us with politics and ideology and issues that just really heavy-handedly push stuff down your throat. Are you feeling me? Really preaching at us as the audience and using the platform to just really spread their messages in a not too subtle way. I think it's quite clear that the hypocrisy going on is becoming more interesting a story than actually what's on the big screen. So many of these nominated movies hardly anyone has seen, let's be honest. I checked out a number of years ago. I used to stay up late to watch the Oscars. I'm not even that invested in the highlights on the news section. It's sad to say that it was something I always dreamed of showing up to one day. Now, it just feels like the golden days are long behind it. I never thought I would say this about the Oscars, the main event of an industry that I am invested in as a creative and a movie buff. I think one of the final nails in the coffin was actually Ricky Gervais. I think Ricky Gervais is a comedic genius. The Office, Extras, but particularly his stint as the recurring host of the Golden Globes. Why did they bring him back? when he just literally insulted all of Hollywood right in front of their faces. I'll tell you why. Ratings. The Golden Globes were like, boy, this guy is fire. Let's bring him back. And every time he came back, he did not disappoint. Except for if you were one of the celebrities in the audience, pretending to laugh and find it funny, even though the joke was very clearly on you. So I think Ricky spoilt it in the way that he burst a bubble. He popped the balloon. He popped the bubble of the illusion of the up there on a pedestal Hollywood actor and actress. Remember, Ricky Gervais, a famous atheist, and I'm a Christian, so you wouldn't think we'd agree, but remember Ricky Gervais telling a story about Father Christmas and why he no longer believes in him, how he mentioned something and his brother was about to say something. His mum gave a look to say, shut up. And at that moment, because he's very sharp, he realised he'd been lied to. And he kind of extrapolated that and, and believed that must be the same with God, that God is a lie that I've been deceived about. So I think there's something in Ricky Gervais that likes to expose the fake and the not real. Obviously, I disagree with him about God, but I get where he's coming from. And I think it's almost like the Emperor's New Clothes when you've watched him with his drink, his pint in hand at these award ceremonies, where he's been dressing down the big and the famous, the glitz and the most glamorous, right in front of their faces, which has often been more entertaining, not just than the award show, but the movies and TV itself. Now, would he ever be a host at the Oscars? I don't think they'd dare. The Golden Globes is desperate to get attention, but the Oscars, even though it could do with that injection of someone like Ricky Gervais, they wouldn't be so bold. It's a shame because they'd probably get the highest ratings in a long time post the famous Will Smith, Chris Rock slap. Now, you know your show's in trouble when that is the talk of the industry rather than, I don't know, the winners. That slap even overshadowed Will Smith's first Oscar win in like 2 decades, almost 3 decades of a career. I think it's a shame. I'd really like the show to get back on track. By the time you're watching this in the future somewhere, I'm sure Oppenheimer won all the awards. Or in an alternate universe, Barbie's won all the awards. But I think the real loser is us, the audience. We've been robbed of a show that's lost some of its sparkle, some of its magic, but even more criminal, we've been robbed of a silver screen that projects pure magic. Are there good movies in 2024? Of course. Is there anything that's really shaking the industry, like when Quentin Tarantino came out with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, or the great indie movement of the 90s, or the new wave of the 60s, or the big blockbusters of the 80s? Do we have anything like that now? I suppose the closest was the comic book genre, but even that's losing its shine. So if you're watching the Oscars and you're having a great time, let me know what I'm missing. Let me know if you think that I'm a bit of an old grouch and I'm missing the best TV gig in town. And let's have a conversation. But until I'm at the Oscars saying I like to thank and being a big fat hypocrite, they can miss me until they start getting good again. All right, see you next time.